This is the tale of the 5 masters and why being disciplined in just one area of combat can get you in trouble. Now I know what you're thinking. Why are we focusing on the mistakes of these 5 masters? Isn't their deep training in each one of their given areas enough to suffice to really pull them out of a real life altercation and have them succeed? Well, the answer is no. What you're gonna find out is that the story of these 5 masters really expose the mistakes of learning that one discipline or just one area of self-defense. The first master is Kicker Kyle. Now, Kicker Kyle is very educated, very trained in the kickboxing arts. Well, one day Kyle was headed down the street going back to his house, and he came in contact with a mugger. And this mugger started to attack him, so what did Kyle do? Well, Kyle stepped back and he started throwing some kicks. He threw 1 kick and 2 kicks, and they were both dodged by this mugger. The 3rd kick went on up, but guess what the mugger did this time? He dived down, he tackled Kyle by his leg, and down on the ground, guess what? All these kicks that Kyle was so good at didn't serve him very well. So what happened? Kyle unfortunately got beaten up very severely. The next master is what we call Boxer Bob. Boxer Bob was just an incredible amateur boxer, and he was out at a bar with some friends, just kind of having some drinks, having a good time, and a fight broke out. Not even one that included him to begin with. Well, Boxer Bob, just being a great guy, he decided to step on in, trying to cool everybody's head within the altercation. So he kind of backed on up against a pool table, and the assailant picked up a pool cue. And every single time Bob would try to just cool down the situation, the guy would take a swing at him with this pool cue. So Bob wanted to move on in, maybe throw one of his quick jabs or one of his powerful crosses, but every single time the guy got on in, guess what the assailant did with this pool cue? He went ahead and smacked Bob right in the head. Well, all it took was one good one right across Bob's face, and Bob went right down to the ground. Once again, Bob was so used to using those boxing tools, but he didn't know what to do up against a situation where he had to deal with a weapon, especially a longer weapon. The 3rd master is who we'll call Grappler Greg. Grappler Greg was an incredible wrestler all through his elementary school years, high school years. He even got so good he got a scholarship to go to college to compete in wrestling. And after his wrestling years in college, he decided he wanted to continue his ground fighting growth and decided to join a jiu-jitsu school and got very good in jiu-jitsu. On top of that, he was just an incredible athlete. He was the kind of guy you always saw in school who would be in the weight room lifting, who would be out running, doing laps around the track and things like that. Well, he was out running around the neighborhood one day and ran into 3 assailants. These 3 assailants just didn't take to Greg very nicely. So what did Greg do? Well, as these guys attacked him, he did what he was trained to do. He would take somebody down to the ground. Well, unfortunately, there were still 2 other attackers that he just didn't pay attention to. These attackers started kicking his head, started kicking his ribs, and started beating up very viciously. So what Greg learned that day was that all of his grappling skills would really serve him in a one-on-one altercation. When it was a multiple kind of attacker situation, he wasn't too successful. The 4th master is Traditional Arts Tim, or we're just called Traditional Tim. Traditional Tim was an incredible practitioner in the old kind of traditional martial arts like karate and taekwondo. Tim would just love to dig on into the history and the culture of each one of these martial arts. He got very good at these arts, where he would go and compete in a lot of these championships. Tim was in a store one day and decided to stop on in and grab some extra groceries for his wife. And unfortunately, he ran into a situation where the store was getting robbed. Tim went back there to lend a hand to the cashier who was getting assaulted. And unfortunately, Tim realized that in that moment, a lot of his traditional moves, he just didn't have the room for in order to defend himself properly. All that training that he did was useless. And unfortunately, that attacker that attacked that cashier and robbed that place also did the exact same thing to Tim as well. The 5th and last kind of master that I want to tell you guys about is who we'll call Weapons William. And Weapons William was very proficient in all the different martial arts that has to deal with weapons. He was trained in everything from fencing all the way to Filipino eskrima. He knew how to handle himself in a real life altercation. Well, one night, William was at home with his wife, and there was a noise downstairs. Well, Weapons William's wife kind of nudged him a little bit in bed and asked him to go downstairs and check things out. So he did so. He walked downstairs, and he found somebody robbing his home. What did he do to defend himself? He looked around, but he couldn't find anything to defend himself. See, William was very confident in working with, let's say, a blade or a stick or even a pair of nunchucks or a bow staff, just something he could use as a weapon. But unfortunately, in this case, he didn't have time to go ahead and grab a weapon. So what did he do? he had to defend himself empty-handed. He just wasn't used to that. So the assailant continued to start beating on him. And William just wasn't used to defending himself just with his hands and feet. What did William learn that day? He learned that he was very, very skilled with weapons, but unfortunately empty-handed he wasn't. Now, what can we learn from the story of these 5 masters? Do we learn that we shouldn't train in martial arts because, hey, we could get caught in something that we just don't understand or we can't cope with? No, the exact opposite. We need to be educated in multi-ranges, or not just in one discipline, but in many kinds of disciplines, many different styles, many different arts. There's not one area, there's not one art, there's not one discipline that is really is a master overall. What we have to do is we have to be a master of each one of the 5 areas of self-defense, which are kickboxing, close quarters combat, ground fighting, weapons, and also mass attack. You see, if we go ahead and we get training each one of those, what's really going to surprise us out in the street? And when I talk about street, I many times use the word street fighting. When I use the term street fighting, I want you guys to think about the word unpredictable. And that's really what we're focusing on right here. We're focused on, defending ourselves up against situations that are unpredictable. Another way to take a look at these 5 masters and their story is maybe use another kind of metaphor. Do you remember back in school where you had one teacher who taught multiple subjects? They taught you math and science and history and even English. Can you imagine going to school that one day and sitting in your classroom and having the teacher just saying, you know what, this Friday we're gonna have a test? Well, I think it's pretty common, even to, let's say, younger students would ask, what is the test in? What are we going to be tested on it? And let's say the teacher would just say, you know what, I don't know. Just show on up, there's going to be a test. Well, imagine there was 2 different students. Let's say there was one student who would go home and just study just for a math test. And they would study everything that they had to learn or they have learned about math. But then you had another student who went home and really went ahead and prepared themselves for everything. Well, imagine both of those students showing up for Friday, and the teacher would get in front of the class and throw a test in front of them. But instead of throwing a math test, the students had to take a science test. Can you imagine the kind of stress that math student would be under, or the student who just studied for math? Yeah, I think I would start sweating as well. That's what happens in martial arts, and that's what we need to do. So whether you're learning from the 5 masters or from those students who are taking a test, make sure that we have a mindset of being multi-dimensional, and that's the focus right here. Multi-dimensional, so nothing is going to surprise us out in the street. Nothing is going to surprise us, whether we have to pick up a weapon, whether we have to fight off our back on the ground, whether we have to defend ourselves against multiple opponents, or even a close quarter situation.